On May 2nd, 2021, I was able to make my first visit to a large theme park in nearly 500 days, and it was to none other than the legendary Hersheypark. Hersheypark is known to be one of the best amusement parks definitely in America and probably the entire world. And while other aspects of the park such as appearance and flat rides are great, the reputation is largely to do with the absolutely incredible collection of roller coasters. They have 14 roller coasters, and sure, there are a few parks that have more, but where Hersheypark really shines is in the quality of their coasters. I would argue that all their top 10 are fantastic rides, and numbers 11 through 14 are all decent. They do not have a single bad coaster in my opinion, which is something very few parks with 10 or more coasters can say. In today's video, I'm going to be giving my personal take on the top 14 roller coasters at Hersheypark. Also, I should mention that I visited Hersheypark 5 times from 2012 to 2016, but I wasn't an enthusiast back then, and this 2021 visit was my first time visiting as an enthusiast, so now I have a different perspective on their coasters and the park as a whole. That's why I think remaking this video is fair, because the list I made in the past is completely different to my list now. Now with that out of the way, I'll stop blabbering and let's get on to the list. At number 14, you probably knew this coaster is going to be here. It's Coco Cruiser, the 2014 Zamperla Family Gravity Coaster. Now I know that saying, ha, Coco Cruiser, elite ride, that's like funny, it's supposed to be funny. But if we're being real, it's a kiddie coaster, which is why it's number 14.
Coco Cruiser.
So for kids.
Roaster.
I have no problem with the ride. In fact, there are some good laterals on the turns, but look at the thing. Moving on. At number 13, we have a coaster that I have some mixed thoughts on, Laff Trakk. Now I love the theming for Laff Trakk. Most of the theming consists of glow-in-the-dark cardboard cutouts, which most of the time will be seen as really poor theming, but for a circus theme like Laff Trakk has, I think it really works. The atmosphere inside that ride building is really something that can't be compared to any other ride. Also, I love the first drop on this ride. It feels so extremely steep, and I went down it backwards. It's easily the best part of the ride, but that's mainly because the rest of the ride is marred by a series of brake runs that bring the train to a nearly complete stop every time. And it's not like Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket where there's plenty to make up for it. The trims take all the thrill away from these elements that would otherwise be pretty exciting. Also, Laff Trakk is supposed to be a spinning coaster, but I would hardly call it that. I went backwards through the entire first half of the layout because the car never quite spun around enough to get me facing another direction. These reasons are why Laff Trakk comes in second to last, but it's still a decently fun ride due to the atmosphere and first drop. Moving up to number 12, we have Trailblazer, the 1974 Aero Development Mine Train. Trailblazer serves its role in the park well, and that's a fun little terrain coaster for families, as well as a tamer ride that you could take a break on while letting your food settle, which is what I did. It's not a big thrill coaster, but it's not trying to be. Also, I will say that there were actually some alright positive G's during the helix. Also, contrary to how a lot of these old Aero coasters ride, Trailblazer is completely butter smooth for some reason. It does have those familiar janky transitions, however, that always add a bit of flavor to Aero's rides. All in all, fun ride, but it's not really meant to do a whole lot, and it is pretty short for a mine train. In the 11th spot is Wild Mouse, the park's 1999 Mock Rides Wildemoz. Now I know that this is a commonly cloned layout, but this Wild Mouse is definitely one of the better Wild Mouse that you're going to find out there, and that's largely because of how flawless the operations are on this thing. It has a moving station so the cars never really stop moving and almost always get back to the station on the same timed interval. That meant that none of the trims on the ride needed to touch us one time, so that enhanced the great laterals that you find in these rides, and we even got some pretty good airtime in the second half. It's also definitely the smoothest Wild Mouse that I've ridden. That being said, it's still a cloned Wild Mouse, which is why it ranks at number 11. Also, just a tip, if you're riding with a partner, try to get the left side of the train, or at least have the heavier person ride on the right side, because most of the ride is left turns, so the person on the right side is going to get smushed. Jumping up a pretty decent amount to number 10, we have Sooper DooperLooper, the 1978 Schwarzkopf Looper. Something kind of weird to think about is that this was the first East Coast looping coaster, and yet it remains the smoothest East Coast looping coaster I've ridden. Anton Schwarzkopf really was a mastermind at coaster design, considering that he made these rides this smooth without the help of computer-aided design. About the actual layout though, the loop was unbelievably intense in the back row. I'd kind of forgotten what positive G's in the head felt like after not riding a large coaster in 500 days, but oh boy, Sooper DooperLooper reminded me real quick. The rest of the ride can be described as a fun mine train, as there's nothing too exciting going on. Actually, Sooper DooperLooper really reminded me of Superman Ultimate Flight Clones because you had a good drop and an extremely intense first inversion, but then really nothing after that. At number 9, I have Sidewinder, the 1991 Vekoma Boomerang. Now, I'm not going to say this is probably one of the best boomerangs in the world because speed of sound and boomerangs with lap bars exist outside America, but I feel confident saying that Sidewinder is probably one of the best boomerangs in America. That comes down to one main factor, which is the vests. The Vekoma vests are some of my favorite non-lap bar restraints because they're flexible and they eliminate all possible headbanging, which boomerangs can be known for. Without any headbanging, you're able to properly enjoy this fun, extremely intense layout where you end up going upside down a total of 6 times. I can't stress that these coasters, especially in the backwards section, are sneakily intense. Out of all the coasters that have recorded forces, boomerangs reach the 4th most G's of any coasters at 5.2, and I'd bet it's on the backwards vertical loop because that's a pretty tight element and you build up a lot of speed before it. Sidewinder goes to show that boomerangs can be pretty awesome rides, but still not absolutely incredible or anything. Number 8 holds one of the most polarizing wooden coasters out there, Wildcat, the 1996 GCI wooden coaster. That's primarily because the roughness can be a bit much for some people, and yes, Wildcat is for sure the roughest roller coaster that I've ever ridden. I was thinking that Boss was rougher for a while, but after riding Wildcat recently, yeah, Wildcat's rougher. But the roughness I actually think is the driving factor in my liking of Wildcat. Almost everything that I like about the ride stems from the roughness, and I think that would be pretty boring if it was a smooth ride. That roughness provides this out-of-control feeling that was really unique and made it a really fun ride, especially when you're screaming at the ride with your friends because of what it's doing to you. Also, I don't think that there would have been any forces if Wildcat was smooth, but the roughness bounces you from side to side at points and bounces you up at other points, so you get airtime and laterals at the most random of places. It kinda reminded me of Swamp Fox in that regard, except not nearly as good because Wildcat doesn't have buzz bars unlike Swamp Fox. Also, the roughness doesn't hurt or anything because the trains are more cushioned than a sumo wrestler. I found Wildcat overall very fun, but a ride where everything good about it is based on its roughness isn't gonna rank extremely high. At number 7, we have the park's other GCI wooden coaster, Lightning Racer. Although I should clarify that there is a very large gap in quality in my opinion between Lightning Racer and Wildcat. Lightning Racer, I want to give you a heartfelt apology for my unkind words about you in the past, and I rescind all my negativity. Aww. You are definitely not boring and mediocre. You're actually now one of the most underrated wooden coasters I've ridden. I was expecting a boring, forceless ride, but Lightning Racer actually provided everything that I looked for in a GCI. It had both lots of airtime and lots of laterals, and those forces weren't even weak at all. The airtime felt pretty strong for a GCI, and all the laterals were quite sharp and snappy. And other than maybe 1 or 2 hiccups here and there, the pacing was pretty good for the most part. Now I know that all that is probably pretty unpopular, but one thing that even Lightning Racer haters have to admit is that the racing is executed flawlessly. The same operator panel controls both sides, so the trains always have to dispatch at the same time, so that makes it a really close race nearly every time. We could barely tell who won, but I'm pretty sure that Team Thunder, which I'm now a member of, barely edged out those lightning weirdos. Lightning Racer was so much better than I remember it being. Moving into the top 6, up next is Comet, the 1946 PTC Buzzbar wooden coaster and the oldest coaster in the park. I know charm is a hard thing to define, but Comet felt like pure classic wooden coaster charm. The ride was completely smooth, yet at the same time it still feels like an old wooden coaster because the ride was very bouncy, but butter smooth between the bounces. It's kind of weird to explain. Maintaining that balance alone would have made Comet a pretty good ride, but what makes it an amazing one and worthy of being the best wooden coaster in the park is the great forces that it has on top of that. The airtime sections are kind of split into thirds, and the first and last third of the ride give fantastic flagector airtime. Then the middle part is indeed floater, but it's better than normal floater because the airtime is enhanced by the buzz bars. Also, the lateral forces were something that I was really not expecting in Comet, but they honestly were some of the best laterals I've experienced. And if you're curious about the way that claim, I have 85 coaster credits, so make of it as you will. I don't think the ride really had any banking at all, so every time the ride turned, you were thrown to the side with laterals, and it made for a ride that really didn't let up from the second the ride started until you hit the brakes. At number 5 is Storm Runner, and before you go get out your pitchforks and throw a mostly peaceful protest, I have an explanation. So Storm Runner was not open when I went in 2021 as the coaster had been closed since 2019. I have ridden the ride, but the last time I rode was in April 2016 with the hard over-the-shoulder restraints. They have since retrofitted the ride with soft straps, but this placement is based on my experience with hard restraints. The hard restraints pretty much ruined the launch and guaranteed a headache no matter where you sat or your riding technique, so that's why the coaster doesn't rank higher. Aside from that though, the rest of the layout is absolutely fantastic and perhaps the best of any intimate accelerator. You have fantastic airtime, incredible positive G's, great pacing, whippy transitions, and of course that flying snake dive that feels so ridiculously high off the ground, and is unlike any other element out there. If I rode Storm Runner today, I could see it ranking anywhere between 2 to 5, but until then, I have it at 5. At number 4, we have one of the most underrated steel coasters I've ridden, and by far the best invert I've ridden out of this, Batman the Ride, Raptor, and Dragon Challenge. We have Great Bear. Because of a number of factors such as its smoothness, incredible setting, and interactions, I have hyped this ride up quite a bit in the past, even placing it in my personal top 5 way back when I had under 50 credits. But one thing that really surprised me this time around that I didn't really remember is that Great Bear is extremely intense, and you feel those G's in both your head and feet on each of the inversions, with the exception of the 0G roll. But that provides great floater airtime, which I would prefer to more intensity because then you have a variety of different forces. Also, it looks like absolutely nothing when looking at POV, but the pre-drop is so intense, and I just don't get it. It feels like you're going 50 miles an hour through it when you're on the ride, and it's just not something that can be explained unless you've ridden it. Also, the setting on Great Bear adds a whole ton to the experience because there's so much going on around you. You can't comprehend it all because you have supports flying at you, Skyrush, Comet, and Sooper DooperLooper weaving around, and the water that feels so close to you in the second half. And then you add an already phenomenal layout onto that, and it feels like no other B&M looper. And number 3 is Candymonium, and putting it at 3 might seem like I think Candymonium is overrated, but quite the opposite really. It's just a testament to how highly I think of my number 2 coaster here. I know I've only ridden 2, but Candymonium is by far my favorite B&M hyper, and I could really see it being the second best B&M hyper in North America, maybe even the best if I'm really disappointed by Mako. Every hill in Candymonium gave at minimum 3 seconds of sustained airtime, with some, specifically the first and second camelbacks, giving 4 to 5 seconds. I mean, I was just in shock at how sustained the airtime was. In the front row, you were completely out of your seat before the train even crested the hill, and then you remained there until you started pulling out of the hill and were hit with positive G's. Also, the second half of the ride doesn't feel the fastest speed-wise, but I feel like it really differentiated the ride from a lot of other hypercoasters, specifically that sort of wave turn thing that provides awesome whip and a crazy head chopper. Overall, think of everything that people praise across B&M hypers, and I think Candymonium has pretty much all of it. Number 2 is Fahrenheit, the most underrated coaster I have ever ridden. And no, I don't just call every single coaster I've ridden that I like underrated, it's just that for some reason Hersheypark specifically, I like a lot of their coasters more than other people do. Fahrenheit took everything that I love in an elite coaster and combined it all into one ride. It has amazing airtime, positive G's, and hang time, so you have a very wide variety of forces. The pacing is out of this world, especially in the second half, and there are a lot of unique elements or the unique sequences like the Norwegian loop. Then you have a number of other factors that add on to it, such as the whip, the smoothness, the vertical lift, and the drop that tries to send you straight into the heavens. I mean, the airtime on that drop and the airtime hill are legitimately Skyrush level. There's just so many dynamic factors I love about Fahrenheit that I just can't spill all out here, so I'm gonna probably make a full in-depth video about Fahrenheit at some point in the future. And now at number 1, well, I'm not Airtime Thrills, so what else would it be other than Skyrush? I have a history with Skyrush and it being down during my visits, so I never got to ride it for a while, but I finally rode it this year and it was well worth the wait to say the least. It's my new number 2 coaster because I was not bothered by the restraints one bit. I actually kind of like the restraints because there's just a lap bar that makes you feel so ridiculously open and exposed, and that's helped by the fact that there's no seatbelt. Also, there are so many things that Skyrush does better than any coaster I've ridden. It has the best first drop, best airtime, best positive G's, best whip, best laterals, best pacing, and the best overall insanity. Looking at the POV does not give this thing justice because it doesn't look extremely fast in the POV, but on ride it feels like you're going about as fast as Top Thrill Dragster. I know you aren't actually, but that's what it feels like. Also, the hills look a bit drawn out in the POV, but you still get absolutely launched on them, and I would be very surprised if it doesn't have the top 3 strongest airtime in the world. Skyrush is the most insane, out-of-control roller coaster that I've ridden by a long shot, and that's not something that you can see from a video. You have to get out and ride it for yourself. So that's going to do for my ranking of Hersheypark's coasters. If you're interested in seeing a full trip report of my time at the park and how my day panned out, I will link that video in the top right and in the description. With that said, make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It is greatly appreciated because it helps with the pesky YouTube algorithm. Also, leave any suggestions, thoughts, or video ideas down in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya.